Good evening. It's February 7th, 2014. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'll be hosting tonight's webcast. You're joining us for our weekly Friday evening broadcast featuring Mr. LaRouche. Tonight I'm also joined in the studio by two members of our basement team, Megan Beats and Ben Deniston, who will be joining me to pose a series of questions. So I would like to begin with our first question, which comes from a institutional source based out of Washington, D.C. The question is as follows. Mr. LaRouche, recent events underscore that we are in the midst of a continuing financial crisis, and that the latest manifestation, following the tapering of the Fed's quantitative easing policy, is currency collapses in some emerging market countries. These recent events have once again encouraged a debate regarding the actual health of global financial markets and the global financial system. What are your thoughts on this situation?
Okay. Well, the economic situation is dire, but this comes in the context that a danger of a thermonuclear war, which on the present schedule could come within the remainder of this month. What is happening in the meantime, and this leads to why it happens this way. What's happened in the meantime is that the fact that the British monarchy, which controls our president, Barack Obama, he was brought into the presidency through British circles, and a hell of a lot of drug money passed in order to get him elected. And it came from London. It came from those quarters. So what happened is now, a countdown has been rigged. It's in process now. And the countdown, which is a showcase in the area of, well, around Russia and areas adjacent to it. What has happened is the whole world has been, in this process, has been divided into two major dominant features. One is the transatlantic region. That part of the world is going bankrupt. It's on the verge of an absolute chain reaction collapse right now. It's just a question of what day it will be, or of what week. It's that close. The U.S. system and the continental Western Europe system are hopelessly bankrupt, and they're about to have the biggest crash in world history. And this has driven the situation to the point of world war, thermonuclear world war. The danger here is, and the economic issues and the military issues are coincident. They're interlocked. You cannot separate the economic problems, the economic crisis, from the threat of a thermonuclear crisis. In the meantime, you've got to think always in the background. What is happening now, you have two parts of the planet which dominate the entire planet as a group. As a matter of fact, there's a global system. Other people who are not in the mainstream, shall we say, of this crisis are drawn into it inevitably. They can't escape from it. We're all in the grip of the same crisis. Some more directly, some more actively, others will be victims anyway. So that's our economic situation. Because it's actually a military situation. It's a strategic one. Now the question is, how can we combine these two forces? The force of the bankruptcy of the United States, and it is ready to go bankrupt. The British Empire is also ready to go bankrupt. So now, at the same time, we have a stooge for the British monarchy who is the president. He's now in the middle or the process of his second term in office. But he was never really a president of the United States. He was a stooge put in there in order to give him the power of the presidency, as is now misdefined, and to use that power through his mouth to impose things on the United States that would not otherwise occur unless he, as the mouth of the Queen of England, controlled the situation. Now, you have to understand the economic crisis. You have to understand the Queen of England. You may recall that you had a Copenhagen conference some years ago, And the Queen came out of that conference, and since has been said, her policy is to reduce the population of the planet rapidly from a level of approximately 7 billion persons on this planet to less than 1. Her object has been, expressed publicly, the intention to reduce the human population from 7 billion people, which it had been about that time of the Copenhagen Conference. Now she's headed toward 1. And you see the president's policies toward the unemployed since January 1st. The plan is to an accelerated death rate to the citizens of the United States, to the elderly, and through the unemployed, or the unemployable. And we have a great amount of the population of the United States among the younger generation, the under 25-year-old generation, essentially. They have no economic future as a group. There may be individual exceptions, or a few dozens here and there, and so forth, but there is no hope. This is the policy of the Queen of England, and he, the president, was a stooge brought in with British drug money, and that track is known. And by this manipulation, they got this fellow into the presidency. Now, he does not think. He spends much of his time each day, when he is not dragged into something else. There's a little area between the family side of the White House and the public side of the White House. Now, there's an office there, a small office, which is between the two branches. In other words, you go through this small office, which is his personal office, where he plays basketball. And he spends, at the highest, I don't know how much he does that now, but in his first term of office, he was playing basketball in his strangely smelly costumes and so forth. Nobody would want to go there, I guess. But anyway, so what's been happening all this time is the policy of the British Empire, which have been conduited into the United States through two agencies, the British monarchy and Wall Street. So therefore, we have now a depletion of the means of existence. This has had a penalty. When you start to shut down economies, you're not going to get prosperity. You're going to get bankruptcy. So what's happened, you've got this great buildup through the British Empire's part of Wall Street. And what they've engaged in, they've shut down everything's real, and they've got a hyperinflationary program. They have never spent much money. Wall Street has never really spent money for something. They've accumulated a hyper-growth of storage of nominal money. And the easing process has been the key mechanism. And it's all been done in this way under Obama, who is now going into about 5 years of in his term of office. He never was a thinking person. He never sought the presidency as such. A lady who was an American, who had been virtually a British citizen, a British agent, came into the United States, went to areas like Chicago, and hauled him into becoming a political figure in the United States. A lot of this was done from around Boston, Harvard University. So he was stuck in there by a big drug funding coming across the Mexican border, for example. And we see his whole administration as that character. So he has not actually been the thinking president of the United States. There have been, as under the little joker that was in there before, 2 terms of office, Bush. And Bush could never think. I mean, he was really drugged up fairly well, and that's a whole story in itself. But you had a nominal president who was not really a functional president under George W. Bush Jr. So now we have another guy who's a clown, who is not really a president. He occupies the office of president in name, and the people who hold him like a marionette with the strings, and they move his mouth, they move him when to shut up too. So what you're dealing with a process in which the British Empire, not the British Kingdom, the British Empire, has been controlling the United States since the ouster of Bill Clinton. Now that's over 3 terms of a president in office. And a lot of bad things have happened. It wasn't really good before. But since Bill Clinton was framed up and was something sucked into him, but since that time, the hope of a recovery of the U.S. economy is gone. In other words, the frame-up that was set up around Clinton, and I was involved directly with Clinton and involved with the Russian side of this thing at that time. I was playing a keystone role between those 2 points of reference at that point. And I saw personally exactly how Bill Clinton was set up. He was framed. He panicked and was framed. But it was an all set up. It was nothing he invented. He walked into it and didn't handle it properly. But it was all set up. It was set up by people in the United States and by the British monarchy. The whole Clinton association with this business was set up by the British monarchy and set up by a high-ranking institution of British intelligence. They ran it, and they ran the leadership of the Republican Party at the same time. So that's where we are. If you try to say yesterday it happened, it didn't happen yesterday. It happened when there was a crisis in the Russian finances. The place was about to break down. So I was in Russia at that time, and I was invited to hold a chairing meeting over the leading figures of Russia at that time. We had it in Moscow, and the question was my advice, as expert advice, on how would they deal with the crisis they went through. And at the conclusion, they were all enthusiastic in adopting it. And the point was, they wanted to know what I would do with the United States. They knew I was on very friendly terms with Bill Clinton. So Bill, that was in August now, Bill then, looking at what I had reported, recognized that there was a solution to this mess for both the United States and for Russia. This would not only be an economic thing as such, it would be a sense of a new force of growth in the world economy by taking sector from the Eurasian part of the world to the European or trans-European part, to the United States. It would have worked. And what was done, that operation of Bill Clinton against him, which was set up by first of all, primarily British intelligence at the highest level of intelligence services. Secondly, the Republican Party leadership was sucked right into it. I should say willingly sucked into it, in more ways than one. So at that point, from that point on, with the crippling of Bill Clinton, prevented a solution to the crisis which was then existing already. So that's the way the thing has worked. Now what happened is, as a result of Bill Clinton's being framed in that way, the way he was framed, and I know the details, I personally know the details, I was firsthand in both sides of the question. So that's what happened. So then, since Bill Clinton left office, and he left in like a limp dog, what was done to him, and he supported as president, signed on to the cancellation of Glass-Steagall. The cancellation of Glass-Steagall through his last term, that operation is what caused the great collapse in the U.S. economy. It was already collapsing, it was rotting away, there were many things wrong with it. Bush, older Bush, H.W. Bush, had made a real mess of things. So that's where we were. Now, that's where the strategic situation lies today. The British intention was another problem. The British Empire was following a green policy. Now, a green policy means that your economy is going to collapse. It means that industry is going to disappear. It means that all the high-tech things that people make income from are going to disappear. And they have disappeared. the collapse. I mean, have this monkey, this so-called president, a mere monkey, saying there's a growth in the United States. There's a cancer. That's the kind of growth it is, and he's the cancer. No, but so therefore we're in that situation. Now what this means is the British Empire, which dominates the transatlantic region of the world and extends its paws into other parts of things, has now bankrupt. It's on the verge of a formal bankruptcy. It is hysterical because it knows the bankruptcy is already here. What they're trying to prevent is the accounting for the bankruptcy. They don't want it to come out and be known. Now, therefore, given the policy of the British Empire, and the British Empire is really the Dutch Empire, and this is a problem which has been a disease over Europe and now the Americas as well, a disease which began in the time of, well, shall we say, during the lifetime of my dear friend. Yeah. So this is history. In other words, this is not something that happened yesterday. This is a process which has extended from the beginning of the 17th century, when the change came, when James I came in. That was when the Dutch took over. And then the Dutch took over and created a joke called the British Empire. But the Dutch always controlled it. The Dutch still control. For example, in the United States, what happened? How was some people assassinated? Alexander Hamilton, for example. He was assassinated by a British agent, Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr was a professional assassin and a British agent. He worked personally for the Queen. He assassinated Alexander Hamilton. But how did he do that? Well, the Dutch had colonized Manhattan at the same time that we were doing things in Massachusetts. And so what happened is, the process was that the banks in Manhattan Island were banks of this operation, of the Dutch banks. It was the Dutch banks operating inside the United States, because they'd been planted there in the 17th century. These Dutch banks became the vehicle of penetration of North America from Europe. And this process converged on an invasion, the Dutch invasion, into the British Isles, and the mass assassination of the Irish, and other kinds of atrocities. So that what we call the British Empire today was really a continuation of the Dutch Empire. And the Dutch Empire became an empire, a successor to the Roman Empire, by defeating the Spanish monarchy. And defeating the Spanish, in South America, for example. The degeneration of the original colonization of South and Central America was a result of this. That the Dutch defeat of the Spanish meant that the whole Spanish-speaking area, Portuguese as well, were brutalized by this process. So that what's happened is the destruction of South America and its economies, as well as North America, has created, under the British rule, has created a transatlantic empire, which has extended its power into other parts of the world. Now this empire, under the British policy, and this is the typical Zeusian policy. Remember, the original Zeus policy was to eliminate unnecessary people, to kill all the poor people. And that's what's being done to us in the United States and Europe now. On the other hand, the other part, the Eurasian part, which is very large, which includes very populous nations. Russia is still a very populous nation. China is even more impressive, much more impressive in that respect. China is a burgeoning economy. It's one of the great economic powers of the world today. Russia has all the characteristics of being able to emerge as a great power again. India is a great power. It has difficulties within it, but essentially at the same time it's a great power. So the Eurasian part of the world is now not only very wealthy overall in total wealth, but it's also growing. The transatlantic part of the world is now collapsing. It's now reaching a point of breakdown collapse. At this point, what happens? An intention to thermonuclear war. What's the intention? You have the transatlantic region has been mobilized, it's bankrupt, it's about to collapse totally, but it's trying to make war to save the British Empire and to defend the British Empire as really the Dutch Empire, which is really a reflection of the Roman Empire in terms of history, the history of culture. So we come to that point. Now, the Eurasian part, apart from all the terrorist operations that have been run in Eurasia to try to weaken Eurasia, that's what's happened to this, done against Russia right now in many parts of Asia. That's what's been done in the whole Arab-speaking Islamic area. Has been very heavily punched by this thing and been used as a device to try to weaken the Eurasian sector. So that's the situation. When you want to discuss what has been raised by this question, that's what you're talking about. And nothing less than that will actually answers that question, which is posed here. So now what's the answer? Well, you say we're at a war. We are, in fact. The British intention is to have a thermonuclear war. The British intention to have a thermonuclear war is governed by the fact that the entire transatlantic region is about to go in the biggest bust that history has ever seen. There is no wealth, net wealth. There's no growth, no prospect of growth in the transatlantic region. There may be a little bit in Germany, this, a little bit of that here and there, but no. Spain, Iberia, destroyed. Most of Italy, destroyed. Southern Italy, destroyed. Greece, largely destroyed. And so forth and so on. And the whole southern part of Europe is being destroyed. That was done earlier. So therefore you're in that kind of situation. So in this period, while the British Empire was concentrating on trying to establish the green policy, as it's called today, over what had been the strongest part of the world economically, the transatlantic region, especially the North Transatlantic region, the United States and what the British controlled in Europe, what they got control over Europe. So now the Eurasia is now an opponent. They let it alone for a while. They went after Russia big, Soviet Union and so forth. But overall, the forces in Asia, which are still growing, because the cultural warfare, despite what was done in the Islamic community, that is still there. So we come to the point, the British Empire is desperate. The British Empire is prepared with the last ounce of money it has left in it. Real money, that is. They're prepared to conduct a thermonuclear war. Now, a thermonuclear war is not like any war that anyone has ever heard of. We came closest to it when Jack Kennedy saved us from a war of that type. Actually, real serious nuclear war. Not yet a thermonuclear war in the true sense. There were thermonuclear aspects to what the Soviet capabilities were, but it was not really this kind of war. Now we've come to a point where you don't know your kitchen sink may contain a missile. I mean, the whole thing, the whole system, the whole world is riddled by secret deposits of weaponry which can be set off, which would mean that any war that would occur between Eurasia, which means Russia in particular, and the transatlantic region, means that you're running up against, on both sides, with a tremendous mass that you don't know what's in your sink, kitchen sink. You don't know what's under the bathtub. They've got weapons all over the place. And, well, that's the way you would do it. So what you do is you set all kinds of weapon systems and bury them in all kinds of places. And that's been going on for a long time. So now you have all these kinds of equipment there waiting to be coordinated, set off in some degree of coordination. aimed at predetermined targets. So that, and this is the system. And the only way you can fight a war between the two sections, the transatlantic region and the Eurasian region, is that. So therefore, any idea of trying to win this war, and what's going on now, is that the British Empire, using stooge, that is what the danger is. Now, Russia and the operations in Ukraine are intended to start World War III, thermonuclear World War III. Anybody in Western Europe or the United States is proposing a war against Russia or take over the Ukraine is going to ensure a global thermonuclear war, from which the probability that within about a day and a half of such a war, there may be almost no one left living on this planet. But the British don't care. It's a Zeusian tradition, as you get from Aeschylus in the account of Zeus, and as you got in the whole history of the oligarchical system throughout the world. Now, the oligarchical system is such. They are going to extermination warfare. Therefore, there is no kind of war fighting that any sane nation can engage in terms of this kind of warfare, thermonuclear warfare. The engagement of the transatlantic region on the one side and the Eurasian region on the other side means that any war that breaks out between those two forces means the general extermination of the human species. So therefore, what's your peace policy? Peace policy is there are certain forces inside the United States, inside Europe, and elsewhere. And these forces will go to this end. The history of the Roman Empire, the history of empires in general, in the past of history of mankind. That's what they will do. Therefore, our job is to take the capability of launching such a war out of the hands of the British Empire. Because China does not want such a war. They have no motive for it. Russia has no motive for such a war. India has no motive for such a war. Then why would they want to fight a war? They don't. Well, why does the United States want to fight this war? Well, because they're traitors to the United States. There's no reason for the United States to go roaming around into Ukraine and trying to start a world war in Ukraine. There's no motive for that. It makes any sense. But you have a bunch of clowns who don't care about reality. They have their own narrow, stupid ideas. They're brainless idiots, in effect. And therefore, what we need is a preemptive peace. And my view is this. We in the United States, if we had our own president rather than this stooge, this British stooge that's stuck in there as a substitute, 60 to 80% of the American people want no part of Obama. They want no part of his policies, therefore they want no part of Obama. But we have a broken down people, a discouraged people. In World War II times, my generation, and I'm World War II time, they would never tolerate this crap. Never. But you have a bunch of young generations who haven't been fed properly, they have not been educated competently, they have no sense of identity, a clear sense of identity. They have surrogate game-playing sense. They're playing games all day. This thumb game that you get among young people out in California. These people are mentally disturbed. It's not their fault. It's the education system that they're subjected to. And the education system in the United States, in the school system, is degenerating at an accelerating rate right now. How can you blame these young guys, these young people, for their bad behavior? Nobody's raised them up. They're allowed to be fed, encouraged on drugs, on all kinds of habits. They're not capable of taking care of themselves, not in a real sense. So therefore, that's what our issue is. So therefore, if we can shall we say, clear things up. Let the people of the United States know that they're hopelessly bankrupt, but we intend to do something about it. And if we say we're not going to have this war, what we're going to do is we're going to send a message over to Putin, to the Chinese, and to others. Okay, let's cut the crap out now. Now, in the process of that, it will be necessary to shut down Wall Street. That's not a problem. We have a law waiting to be reenacted called Glass-Steagall. If we implement Glass-Steagall afresh and shut down Wall Street, we can create federal credit, just as Alexander Hamilton prescribed the method. His 3 cardinal principles of government and economic government as Treasury Secretary of the United States, and others after him who had the same idea. We'll make that's our deal. That's what we're going to do. Will you agree with it? Well, we have to get Obama out of there. Well, that's easy. 60 to 80% of the people want no part of him. The sentient members of our adult population want no part of this clown. They know they don't want any more of what he represents. They're starving to death. They've been cut off all support. They're actually being murdered by Obama. He has no recourse to means of existence. I suggest very simply, the solution is elementary. Excommunicate Obama and do that as a part of his expulsion from office. Because he's some kind of a heathen, whatever it is, we don't want it. But that's what the solution is. If we recognize that we have no reason to tolerate what our government is doing by kissing the rear end of the British Queen, which is not a very tasteful move, then we can say, if we can tell the people out there who are desperate that we do have a means in our tradition as a nation, as a republic, in our Constitution, we have the means to start regrowth of this economy, eliminate the payments of these parasites, these suckers who are sucking the blood of the nation. Wall Street, shut them down. We don't need them. They're thieves. We'll go in there like, pick them over. What's there, we'll take it back. And the rest of it, we'll say it ain't yours anymore. You didn't earn it. The fact that you have a system, which is a money system, what about reality? What about value, real value? Paper values? Forget it. Paper values, hey, these are fake. There's nothing in there. There's nothing physical in there. There's no health care, et cetera, et cetera. So all we have to do is shut down Wall Street, which is a Dutch trick, a dirty Dutch trick. Yeah? And just say, okay, we'll go back to Franklin Roosevelt's method. Last shot. Franklin Roosevelt. And do the same thing he did. The first thing is shut down Wall Street. And if we decide we're going to shut down Wall Street, don't play any of this fake, constitutional stuff. It's not constitutional. Wall Street is very bad for your Constitution. But that's where we stand. That's what the issue is now. That's the reality. The only solution for victory is peace.
Well, as people probably know, there was a recorded telephone conversation that was posted on the internet yesterday that was very embarrassing to the two people involved. Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, who's heard conniving with Jeffrey Piat, who's the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, about how to engineer a reorganization of the Ukrainian government. Together with the very crude and offensive language which Nuland used in reference to our supposed allies in the EU, the real scandal of this tape is that it confirms precisely what numerous sources have alleged, that the Obama administration is directly responsible for an active operation now underway to overthrow the government of a sovereign country, which is an explicit violation of international law. In fact, this point was made very clearly by Sergei Glaziev, who delivered a interview to Commerçant published yesterday, in which he said the following. He says, "According to our information, American sources are spending $20 million a week on financing the opposition and the insurgents, including on weapons. It has been reported that the guerrillas are being briefed on the grounds of the U.S. Embassy and that they are being armed. Of course, this is unacceptable. This comes under the definition of a coup, according to Ukrainian law and international law. Everybody is afraid, for some reason, to call things by their names. The West is calling terrorists and putschists activists and trying to portray them as peaceful demonstrators, when they're really nothing other than what Glaziev calls professionally trained armed stormtroopers." He goes on to say that the West should stop its blackmail and intimidation, such as what Victoria Nuland has been engaged in during her meetings in Kiev. He says, "Our information is that at these meetings, she lets people know that they would land on blacklists if President Viktor Yanukovych did not hand the governance of the country over to the opposition. This is blackmail, which has nothing in common with international law. This is not merely interference in domestic affairs. This is an attempt to control Ukraine." Now, Lynn, you just made the point, and you've made it previously, that what's happening in Ukraine is even far more dangerous than just this. That what we see with this operation is an intention not to just escalate a process of warfare step by step in some sort of geopolitical strategy, but to unleash a condition of total war against Russia, which inevitably would involve the use of thermonuclear weapons, and from which there is no possible exit strategy once it starts. So, as you said in your opening remarks, there is only one definitive option by which this process, which has already been set into motion, can be stopped. And that is the immediate initiation of impeachment against the mouthpiece of the empire, Obama. You've made that point strongly in what you've said already, but I think that maybe you can make the point again in this context.
Yes, well, you know, most people don't know because I came out of such crazy vilification, but I was never a warrior to begin with. I was a soldier, and did a couple of kinds of duties as a soldier, and I was involved in Asia. But I was not really a usual person. I didn't believe in many of the things. I never accepted, some theories of economy, for example, or theories of, kinds of things of that sort. So, but anyway, in the course of time, I became a very successful management consultant as a personal member of a team of a consulting firm. I was right in forecasting a great crash which occurred in the late part of the 1950s. And then I ran up against the FBI. They wanted me to work for them. And I said no. I said, you don't need my help. That was what they were talking about. There's no problem at all. So why do you want to make all this fuss and get me involved in trying to do something against some small group out there which has no real influence in terms of the economic process? I'm working my work. Now, if you got some problem that I think is worthwhile and you want to come to me and talk about it, I'd be perfectly willing to talk about it. But they didn't like that. So they decided they were going to punish me by destroying me. And they spent a lot of time, a lot of West. They spent probably about a decade in trying to absolutely destroy me. But it only made me more determined, And so, when the time came where I was skilled as a forecaster, I forecast in 1968 that I or something, that what was going to happen. And I said, look, we're on the edge of a breakdown of the whole market system that you're running here. And you've got to change now. And the answer I got was, no, we have the perfect system. It's depression-proof. So in the summer, beginning with July, the summer of 1971, the whole thing went from there into the end of the year, and it collapsed. And so on the 2nd of December of that year, they brought in the British authorities. They were going now to defeat me on this issue. Well, they didn't defeat me too well, and they admitted it later, because I shattered these characters because they were fraudulent, and so that began my career as a real public career. Before that, I'd been capable of all these things beforehand. I had a background with it, but the FBI was always on my tail because they hated my guts. I had refused to submit and kowtow to them. I said, "You don't need me. You're going to ask me to do this, and there's no reason why I should do that. It's useless. You don't need to do it at all. It's a waste of your time. Come back and tell me with something that's really serious that I can make some help on. Well, that's different." But they didn't like that, and so they broke up my marriage. They engineered it very systematically. I understand them perfectly. I understand exactly how they did it. I had all the evidence there, and they kept doing things. So I just evaded them a little way, in my own way. Sometimes I have my own ways. And that's what happened. So that is what happened since that time. It happened really with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Because immediately after the Kennedy assassination, the purpose in that was the FBI that did it. That no bones about that. That's not speculation. That's hard fact. And so the assassination of Kennedy, who was really a real wonder in terms of what he accomplished as president for as long as he stayed there, but they terrified everybody. And Wall Street was the crowd that did it. Wall Street was responsible for the Kennedy assassination. They were the motive force. And it came from a meeting in out of California. The governor of California was a key instrument in organizing that collapse. So now we found ourselves in a long war which was totally unnecessary, which Douglas MacArthur had quite rightly said, it's crazy, don't do it. The president has said no. So when he refused to go to a war in Indochina, they killed him. They didn't like him anyway. They killed him. They killed his brother, too, who was about to be nominated, confirmed in nomination, as a candidate for the President of the United States. Killed him, too. Later, for the similar reason, they tried to kill another president, but he survived. And he, with the people who I was working with, that president cooperated in my project, the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. I created the SDI. I did it by a lot of scientists involved with me. I actually worked out a system, a whole system of international weapon systems. So I know this business. And I know it's political business primarily. It's not military it's not practical as well. It's not economic as such. It's a social process of development of the productive powers of labor of mankind. And what we've seen is since Kennedy was assassination, the United States has never progressed 1 inch per capita. The economy of the United States has never recovered from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the mechanism that started that process was the war in Indochina. We sent soldiers to war, and they came back as drug addicts. Almost a whole decade of warfare in just that one war. And we went from there to new wars and new wars and new wars and new wars. Crisis management. And the American people got poorer and poorer and poorer. And Wall Street got richer and richer and richer on fake money. And then when my dear friend was framed up by orders from the highest level of British intelligence. And the highest level of British intelligence got the Republican Party to attack him. And the last decent president we ever had since that time, was dragged through the mud. He's still around. He still fights. He's still significant. He's not dumb. He makes mistakes from time to time. But that's a pretty good record compared with the junk we've been had recently since that. Then you had a president who was nothing. Bush, the case, people should know what Bush is. Young Bush. George W. Bush, Jr. Well, mentally he's a junior, no question about that. But he was never really president. He was, as a matter of fact, in the case of war, he was being recruited. And he was recommended that he be assigned, since he's the son of a president. He's also a son of something else, but that's a different matter. But he was a drug addict with all kinds of filthy habits. So they tried to stick him in the Texas National Guard, State Guard. And the State Guard took one look at him and said, no. And by a hand of heaven in some wonderful way, he was shipped to a neighboring state, where his drug habits and so forth were kept under control and out of sight. And then, lo and behold, one day he appears as the President of the United States. A completely fake piece of crap, and the father was no damn good either. The only one with any brains was Prescott Bush, or maybe some of the brothers involved there. But Prescott Bush was the guy who put Hitler into power. We have had a Bush League presidency ever since. That's what the problem is. What we need is to understand the principles on which our republic was based, including economic principles. We have to go back to the principles with the correct principles, which were inaugurated by Alexander Hamilton. Without Alexander Hamilton's three policies, especially those three policies of his administration, that's what made the United States able to survive. But Alexander Hamilton was assassinated by the British monarchy, which means the Dutch monarchy. And that's what the problem is. If we understand that, and understand our presidential system, most of the presidents of the United States who had been elected so far were bums or outside traitors, outside traitors. I've gone through the list again and again. Every one of them is a traitor to the United States. And these two pairs, crazy little George and George W. and this clown imported from, we don't even know whether he's whether a citizen or not. It may have been a frame-up of papers, but the evidence has never been presented conclusively to anyone. We don't even know was the mother of his, he was the son of his mother, so on. This is disgusting stuff. And the point is here, you don't need war. There's no reason for war, especially thermonuclear war. The point is, if we restore our nation to the republic it was founded to be, it is sufficient. There is no limit. There is no outside limit which can stand in our way into realizing the intention of our republic. And all we have to do is have enough people in the Congress and elsewhere in similar positions, people of experience in government. Put them in there. Get this bum out of there. Get the other bums who want to kiss his butt. Get them out of there too. But we can do that, and it's feasible for us, and I know I'm an expert in this stuff, because the other guys who were thought I was wrong were wrong. Right? So if we take that kind of policy, and if we cooperate with our friends across the Pacific, we cooperate with people in Europe who would want this, we can, as a United States, we can be the center again of the organization of across the Pacific and the Atlantic. That is within our hands. I will not live to see most of what we can do, but my job is to try to make sure that it happens, that it starts and stays in that direction. I, in the few remaining years of my life, will do that. I'm doing it right now. So if I die sometime, don't worry, I'll still be there. You may not see me moving around, but what I represent will still be there. We can rebuild our nation. We can use the ideas on which our nation was founded as a republic. Go back to those principles, that of Franklin Roosevelt in particular, to Abraham Lincoln, to McKinley, another victim of assassination. We don't need this crap. We will have to work hard to rebuild our nation and rebuild the world. But it's worth doing.
Lynn, the next question is actually two questions, which come to us from elected officials who are involved in both the fight against Obama and against Wall Street. Now, as you know, there have been a number of resolutions introduced into state legislatures in the current session to support Glass-Steagall, including Maryland, Alabama, Washington State, and Arizona. So the first question comes from one of these state representatives on the East Coast, who asks, 2 years ago, when I was first asked to support a state resolution calling on Congress to reinstate Glass-Steagall, I thought it was a good idea, but a lost cause. I have fought many local battles to save homeowners from foreclosure and to protect general victims of the economic crisis. But many times the banks find the loopholes to get away with outright theft. In my district, the official unemployment is 7%, with both long-term unemployment and misemployment, especially of the youth, at probably 15 to 20%. In 2013, I was more convinced that the state representatives had to speak up, but was not quite sure that Congress could be moved, especially after calling my own personal member of Congress. In recent discussions with my colleagues, we all agree that Glass-Steagall needs to be reenacted, but we also believe Congress to be dysfunctional. I agree and support your strategy of having state representatives step up to the plate, or onto the stage, as I am told, to send a clear and unmistakable message to Congress, and real progress has been made, but my constituents and I know that it's not enough. What more can we in the state houses do to quickly get Glass-Steagall implemented? Now, the second question comes from a state representative in the South. And the question is, Mr. LaRouche, for those of us who at one time supported President Obama, you have thoroughly convinced us that we were misguided. But some of our Republicans on the state level are just as bad. I hope and believe that the voters have had enough and will use the 2014 state elections to push out some of the more radical folks and create a path for Glass-Steagall and for real jobs. Today, I am being told that we may have less than 26 days before hell. So how do you suggest that we at the state level proceed, besides saying a Sunday prayer with our church congregation?
Yes. Well, I think the point is, I think we can do that. You know, Franklin Roosevelt made a revolution. He threw out the bums in Wall Street, and he exposed their criminality. He died. He had to go for the better part of 4 terms in order to get something working properly. But he died, and Truman came in. Truman was a Wall Street creature. They talk about it, but some kind of Iowa or so forth. That's nonsense. He's total Wall Street. He's a Wall Street clown. No brains at all to speak of, just nastiness. A hat. You say he was talking through his hat most of the time. But the question is, how do you deal with that? First of all, it depends to a large degree on the fact of the quality of our citizens. And what's happened is, with the establishment of what became the Confederacy, was actually done by Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, who was the chief assassin in the United States, operating in the United States, against the United States, but he was working for the Queen of England, or the King of England at that time, a British agent. And he was the guy who put, guess who into power? Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson and Aaron Burr. Now, Jackson was a loudmouth creep. He no longer had any personality to speak of whatsoever. He was despised by all the people around him, but he was considered useful as a crazy, bad-mouthed bully. Now, the guy that worked with him Van Buren, was a Dutchman from the Manhattan district and came out of British banking circles run from Britain. And they were the old Dutch bankers with the top-ranking British bankers around Manhattan, where the Dutch had colonized Manhattan. Huh? So that's typical. Then you have a Roosevelt who was actually the protege of the leader of treason in the conspiracy. So they assassinated the president, and the vice president succeeded for 2 terms, the completion of 2 terms. You had another president who organized the Ku Klux Klan from inside the White House. And he built a bigger U.S. Ku Klux Klan than had existed under the original one. You had these clowns. You had Harding, who was alleged that he had suffered death from eating oysters while riding in a train, from the Midwest toward the West Coast. Well, he was a practical and good man who had some good policies, and some people didn't want him to live. Strangely, somehow, oysters, or allegedly, jumped out of their shells and killed him while riding on the train. So you had the presidents we had after McKinley and after Harding. The presidents we had ain't worth talking about. They were evil. Hoover was evil. And so forth. They were evil. And that was typical. Take the list of assassinated presidents. Now look at this from a political standpoint. What was their political color? It was generally not black. And they were all belonged to that particular kind of tribe. So what you had is this Dutch disease. Not the Dutch elm, but the Dutch-British disease. And that's been our problem. Now, therefore, you get things like the Horatio Alger generation, the post-Brahms generation. And you get the same kind of thing. So what's happened, we have had massive corruption. Our educational system is evil. The education in our universities is also, to a very large degree, purely evil. The scientific education is intrinsically incompetent. They believe in numbers. They think that mathematics explains science. It does not. There's been no great scientific discovery ever made on the basis of what is called mathematics. Some people use mathematics, but it's not a matter of principle. It's a matter of convenience. El Cheapo science, mathematics applied. Where mathematics, real science, is much closer to Bach. It's Einstein, it's Max Planck. Now these are real scientists which are well known. So the problem we have is this. Our people, 60% to 80% of our adult population, hates what Obama represents. They may not hate him personally, but they hate what he represents. He's done everything possible to destroy their lives, the lives of their children, to corrupt their families. If they've had children, children are in the streets, or virtually in the streets, with no prospect of important employment, no achievement available to them. And you have young adults, as well as older ones, who hate this. They hate it. But they feel, what can they do? What can they do? Look, all these guys up there, the senators, you can't move them. They don't give a damn. You have a few geniuses, senators that can actually think, and can think honestly. They may make mistakes, but they make honest mistakes. Now, you come to a time where a people is ready to revolt. We are now in a condition where the people of the United States 60% or more of the adult population wants a revolution. They wouldn't call it a revolution. They want a change. They want a healthcare system, for example, instead of this phony. They want fair treatment in housing. They want a crushing of the inflation, which is brought on them by Wall Street. Very simple. If we, therefore, are going to commit ourselves to a trust, if we're trustworthy, we're going to shut down Wall Street. And we're going to give the people back their money or cancel the phony money. Then we're going to build up with the same method that we started our republic. We will then have a credit system. And the credit system will be limited to uses done through various institutions such as banks, regular commercial banks, organized in the districts, the 12 districts. We simply get everything that's phony and say it's over. We audit it. We put it through an auditing test. We say the law was wrong, so let's go repeal the law. Let's mobilize the percentage of the votes. 60% of the population or 80% of the population possibly are willing to stand up if given the opportunity and change this policy. They don't have to make a revolution. All they have to do is be Americans, following the policy of our government, our Constitution. That's all that's required. And Glass-Steagall is a keystone for that. That was used by Franklin Roosevelt. It'll work again. The problem is we have lost technology. Our people are ignorant of technology, by and large. Very few people have experience with advanced technology. So my view is what? We're going to have to go a leap. We have a limited number of people available to us, especially in cooperation with other nations. China, for example. We are on the age of thermonuclear fusion in a way which has never been possible before. What has been proven by Chinese scientists in landing on the moon has demonstrated to us that it's possible now for us to take the thermonuclear fusion, helium-3. Now, helium-3 is a product which is produced by the sun. It's a characteristic behavior of the sun. The sun is shrinking. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to pop tomorrow, but it means the sun is shrinking. But why is it shrinking? Because the power of the sun is expressed typically, not exclusively, but typically is expressed by thermonuclear fusion. And what's thermonuclear fusion? Guess what? Helium-3 is a characteristic feature. It's a product of what the sun produces in great mass. However, we on Earth are protected from this kind of radiation, protected from the sun, by a magnetic field. Therefore, we are protected against this radiation of helium-3. However, if we package it on the moon and can successfully bring it down to Earth, we can put it into a thermonuclear fusion process. We will then have entered a period of power of mankind in the solar system which has never been possible before. So therefore we will have to take things which are science driver programs. Forget this whole green crap. Forget it. Science driver programs which will enable us to create a trickle-down effect. We will take poor people, poorly educated people, as well as a few the rarely available top scientists. We will concentrate our whole program on these top science driver programs. Those will create all the jobs and increase the productivity of the labor force, even among the person who are the poorest, because we can always provide them a step up to something better and a future for their family. And that's us. That's the United States. That's the mission of the United States. That's the principle of the United States. And we're on the verge we can do that. And what we have to do is cooperate with China. China is the one who's done the pioneering now on what other scientists knew could be done, in part, before, including one of our leading astronauts who's still around, Schmidt. So therefore, why don't we just take with the few best scientists we have, congregate them in great scientific projects, pull teams together, train teams of people who are not yet adequately trained, train them in the process of doing these operations, We can then have an accelerator process. We may not be able to meet all the needs of our people now. The resources have been wasted. What we now have to do is do the best we can. And we have to, the human being is not an animal. An animal depends upon what they can experience in their own lifetime. A human being is not an animal. A human being can experience now what he has foreknowledge that will be accomplished by him as a benefit to be enjoyed by his grandchildren.
So this will be the final question of the evening on the subject of science and art. This year, 2014, marks the official year of culture in Russia. And in a recent speech at the Presidential Council for Culture and Art Presidium in Pskov, Russia, President Putin made the following comments. He said, "We need to educate a new generation, to cultivate in them good artistic taste and the ability to understand and appreciate theater, drama, and music. If we went about this the right way, probably we would be able to avoid tragedies like today's tragedy in Moscow." He's referring to a school shooting. "We need high-quality, serious theatrical performances for children and teenagers that will introduce them to Russian and world classics, to teach them to think, to empathize, and believe in the power of the good. Culture is an immense integral phenomenon that transforms individuals into a people and a nation. We all realize the tremendous part that culture plays in developing our country, strengthening its influence and reputation in the world, and preserving its integrity and national sovereignty. After all, without culture, what sovereignty can we speak of? And what would there be to fight for? Culture and education are the elements that form our country's human capital and are part of our historical code and national character. This is why state cultural policy must cover all areas of life, help to preserve traditional values, deepen our spiritual ties with our native land, raise trust among people, and increase their responsibility and participation as citizens in developing our country." Now, Lynn, you have recently spoken, including in your opening remarks today, a great deal on the issue of education and the development of the mind. And you've also spoken a great deal about the issue of the horrible miseducation of people in this country, which has afflicted us over the past decades and led to a point of nearly 12 years of toleration of the worst presidencies in United States history. Now, this past Wednesday, in a discussion posted on this website, you commented that it's the separation of a scientific education from its true source, classical art, which has done the greatest damage to our people's ability to think and to understand what the human mind is. It's damaged our ability to make new discoveries and has replaced it with what you've referred to as an animal training program of repeat after me. Now, in contrast to this, you have put forward the example of someone who didn't have this issue, and that someone was the great strategic thinker and the great scientist William Shakespeare. So I'd like to both give you a chance to respond to President Putin's remarks and also to elaborate on why you're telling us that Shakespeare is one of the greatest strategic thinkers among us today.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of these questions come under one great issue, that mankind is not an animal, but mankind is being educated as if he were an animal. Mankind is being treated socially as if he were an animal. And that mankind is not an animal. The difference is what's called creativity. Now, for most people in the educational system today, as a result of that educational system, very few people understand the principle of science. For example, all modern science of any competence depended upon two great figures of the Renaissance period, Brunelleschi the older figure, who invented physics. He built a great cathedral. It was the first miracle of its type ever created. I've been there, I know it, I've seen it again and again, and I've admired it and studied it. I've worked with scientists in understanding what the accomplishment was. He was the greatest genius. He changed all kinds of conceptions of physics and so forth. All the bad ones, the one I used to hate, like, geometry, the crazy geometry that's taught in the school. It's for idiots. It's not for human beings. It's not scientific. It's junk. Euclidean geometry is garbage. It always was. It never had any scientific merit whatsoever. For example, I was about the age of 14, and I used to visit with my family. We'd go over to the Charleston Navy Yard, in the outskirts of Boston. And I went there a number of times, and I'd seen the U.S. Constitution at bay again and again. But how can you just keep going the Constitution all the time? I was, 13, 14 years of age at that time. So I enjoyed the Constitution. I thought it was great. But we weren't able to take it out. We were not able to go with it. We were not able to experience anything with it. So I looked at other things. And now I happen to be, not so coincidentally, in a period in which there was the transition from iron and brick steel construction in cities to iron and stone, brick. But we had come to a new phase. We were now in the age of high scraping, shall we say, areas. Steel, structural steel. So I would go over and study this structural steel and compare it with the iron and the brick construction. And I would bet in a number of visits, 3 or 4 visits there. And I realized what I was looking at. Now, I didn't know anything about Euclidean geometry as such. I didn't know that the name Euclidean geometry existed. So, first day of this class, a teacher who happened to be a friend of my mother's, I said, well, do you know what geometry is? Any of you got ideas what geometry is? I said, yeah, sure. She said, okay. So I said, well, I'd explain this process about the structural steel, that you have to compensate for the part of the steel that is actually useful in supporting structure, as opposed to an iron rod, and you have to realize that you must not have all that weight. You must discover how much of that area of steel you actually require to do the supporting job, and what part is just weight that's going to increase the burden. So I saw this in the form of the punched hole steel structure. I saw it in terms of these cross wires, which were approximated. And so I said, that's it. This is, to me, is the principle of geometry. It has to be, because it's the principle of construction. And boy, did I get really beaten up on that one. No, that's not what Euclid says. I said, well, Euclid's an idiot. And which he was. And this was my experience, in terms to find exactly how I resolved what was going on. Because the problem we have in society is that people, in the education process, even in my age group, is much worse now. Education in public school systems in decent parts of, where the economy is stable, it's worse than ever. Children are, teenagers and so forth, university students, are worse educated in this time than they were in mine. People of my generation were geniuses compared to what you've got as college graduates today. It's a fair statement, no exaggeration whatsoever. And you look at the educational program. The basic problem here is, which is common to both then and now, is that the basis of what people think they know is based on the presumption that they're given tests on various subjects. They're preconditioned to prepare to receive these tests. And if the teacher says something wrong, well, the teacher will mark you down for supporting a position they don't agree with. And this is not done on the teacher's volition. It's done by the system of education. So the system of education prescribes these methods of right questions and answers. And you're supposed to guess what the right question is and the right answer for the question. And if you're graded then and rated on the basis of whether you agree with what you're taught or not. This was bad then, it's much worse now. Public opinion now is more ignorant. It almost makes monkeys look smart, the way the education system works. So that essentially is the key part. So the problem is, what does science mean? Then you get into the real meat. And you start from this kind of exploration, realizing why you're right. You know you can prove it physically, experimentally, and what the teachers tell you is wrong. But they'll insist, they'll grade you, and they'll teach you, and they'll try to drum it into your head. Well, I was a very stubborn character. I didn't like that kind of stuff, and I would drum back. But what the demonstration is, you say, wait a minute. They say mathematics is science? I've just seen the mathematics that, in this classroom. I've seen mathematics. It ain't true. It's not true. That it's not based on numbers. Well, and the short of it is, as she was referring to, is the fact that mathematics is not science. Mathematics is a cheap imitation of science. It's not science. And other considerations are involved. What you see is when you look at the mind of man, and that's what I look at. And I'm a great lover of classical music composition. I lived on it. I dwelled on it. I devoured it. I pursued it. I sought it out where I could get at it. And I know something about science. And then when I compare that with Shakespeare, Shakespeare was a scientist. He was not a playwright. Yes, he was also a playwright. But he knew how to put some stuff into the play, which is something most playwrights don't know how to do. That's why you get the crap in music and the crap in drama and so forth that you have in the public area now. Because we don't realize you cannot separate the passion of man from what you want to call the knowledge of man. And Shakespeare demonstrates that. He demonstrates that in his insight into history. Now, what is this thing why can't monkeys invent? They may invent sometimes, but you don't want them around at the time, if you know anything about monkeys. Now, the gorilla, that's a different case. Mm-hmm. The gorilla is very polite. He doesn't ask for sex until his wife beats him up for buying. A very gentle guy. Amazing, this big brutish guy is very, very gentle kind of animal, the mountain gorilla especially. But the issue is what is humanity? Well, humanity is not an animal. You see, you have two parts. The mental process is divided into two different parts. You have the function of the brain. Now, all kinds of things have various approximations of brains. Plants almost even try to develop an approximation of that, the way they function. But it's mostly tension, biological tension. But in mankind, it's different. In mankind, we take people like Max Planck and Albert Einstein, outstanding, well-known names. What's different about them and keep a piece of crap like Bertrand Russell? And the students of Bertrand Russell, who are all a pain in the neck, or other parts of the anatomy, if you prefer. You realize that there is no separation between man's particular kind of creative passion, and I mean creative, and what makes man different than an animal. It's something which I'll call in many ways spiritual. But the spiritual is something vaporous, something which is not real, is vaporous, is mysterious. Well, it's not mysterious. It's only mysterious to the ignorant. And our job is to develop a society in which ignorance is cured. It doesn't mean perfect cure, because you will always have to progress. But that's the point. What do we mean by progress in knowledge? We mean the discovery of principles. What did Max Planck discover? What did Einstein discover? They didn't discover how to deduce something. they discovered a principle which was previously unknown. And they were able to test whether or not it was known, a new unknown quality. Right? Mankind is not an animal. Mankind, as we know him, first as mankind, well, we can prove it archaeologically and otherwise, mankind was cooking his lunch. Animals don't cook their lunch. They don't use fire as an instrument. They are Prometheans, not Zeusians. Zeusians don't allow fire to be used by people. Only Prometheans permit fire to be used as an instrument of man. Now, what is it we mean by fire? Well, we mean chemistry. And chemistry is not a fixed system. The universe is changing all the time. It's evolving to higher states. But the animal can't do that. The animal has no knowledge of that. But a human being does. So you have people like Cusa and Brunelleschi. They were exemplary of a new generation, a new culture, coming out of a very dark period of man's past. They created modern science, and they didn't believe in deduction. And that's the difference. Because when we educate people properly, we realize that mathematics does not have anything to do with passion or with principles of science. What they believe is a dead man. They are like the victims and the pupils of a school where the teachers set down the rules and you're graded on the basis of whether you happen to have the lucky one who thought what the teacher wanted you to hear. Then you got a good grade. If you didn't like that, you got a bad grade. And that's the way this thing works. So the system of society is actually we're treating people like animals, when actually creativity is located in the ability of the individual to make a discovery of a principle of nature. And that's chemistry. Mankind operates on the basis of chemistry. It's called fire. It's the Promethean force of fire. And by fire, you rise to higher and higher powers of chemistry. And many chemists get confused on this because they get so crept up with what they can do. They forget about discovery. But everything that was done in chemistry came as a discovery, a creation of the human mind, of the human imagination, and the ability to criticize your imagination and to determine by testing whether this thing you call a principle is true or not. You test it. Now, many chemists don't do it properly, but the intention in the system of chemistry is there. Mankind is the fire bringer. He's the Promethean, the fire bringer. And what he's doing is discovering new, higher forms of fire, like the application of helium-3 to the process of creating a superpower of power for mankind per capita on Earth. And therefore, as long as you believe that mathematics will teach you that stuff, you're an idiot. You may not intend to be an idiot, but you were educated to be an idiot. Because you didn't do one thing, that's the difference between man and beast. The essential difference. What is the spirit? The creative spirit. No animal has ever been able to actually discover a principle. Whatever principle they have is built into them biologically. But the human body has two crucial points. One is the brain, the human brain. The other is the human mind. The human mind is a product of the noetic process operating on the brain. So therefore, when you die, if you're a scientist, you're dead. You're silenced. Your body no longer functions. It goes away, it disappears. But then, when you look at the case of Max Planck, or Albert Einstein, or Nicholas Cusa, or Brunelleschi, or Kepler, or Leibniz, you see a process of discovery. And no animal ever made a discovery. a discovery of principle. What happens is, once you die, if you're a creative person, once you die, you achieve a quality which is called immortality. Because what you have done, you have given others around you the experience of making discoveries. So instead of trying to learn how to respond to predetermined behavior, which is what the stupid student does in the school to get an A grade, you become fascinated by the process of discovery, which is located only in the human mind, but not in the human body otherwise. The human body, biologically, is necessary to support the function of the human mind, even to give birth to it. But what remains is immortal, and is true immortality, as many people have understood it. Our mortality is the immortality of what we call the soul. It's something which is associated with the mind. It's associated with the body in the sense that you don't develop the mind without the nourishment of the body. But once you have a mind, a developed mind, and the ability to create noetically that mind, you become a human being. The problem is that we bestialize people. We bestialize them by, talk. By saying fact. But no fact is true. No fact ever existed that was true. Because always, in every case, in every generation, every part of mankind, something is changing, and what was true yesterday is no longer true because something new has come into being. And it's the process of coming into being, into higher organizing, as opposed to the deadliness, the satanic quality of deadliness of the green policy. That's the difference. It's creativity. And you can never reduce creativity to mathematics. As a matter of fact, the reliance on mathematics for physics is bad.
Well, that's going to bring a conclusion to our broadcast tonight. I encourage people to keep your eyes out for a report that Mr. LaRouche is now completing called Tragedy Defined, 26 Days to Hell or Not, Countdown. And a lot of what we discussed tonight is explored also in this report. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I want to thank Megan Beats for joining me. And thank you very, very much, Lynn. That brings a conclusion. Good night. Stay tuned.